Welcome back. This is your math tutor Naresh. So this is the third video of exponent rules. So let's start with rule number 3. So rule number 3, we're going to practice some questions. So rule number 3, when we have an exponent raised to an exponent, and the rule says we can multiply the two exponents. So now let's look at an example. So 3 to the 2 raised to the exponent 5. So we have base 3 to the power of 2, 3 squared, and now the whole thing raised to another power, right? So we have exponent raised to an exponent, and the rule says we can multiply the two exponents. So this is going to be 2 times 5, so 2 times 5 is 10, so the answer is 3 to the 10. Now a to the 4 raised to the exponent 2, so exponent 4 and then to another exponent. So exponent to an exponent, so we multiply the exponent. 4 times 2 is 8. 12 to the 3 raised to the exponent 2. So the base is 12 raised to the exponent 3, 3 then again raised to another exponent. So multiply the two exponents. 3 times 2 is 6, so the answer is 12 to the 6. Alright, so x to the 3 raised to the exponent 7. So exponent to an exponent, that's what you've got to recognize. Once you recognize that, you multiply the exponent. So 3 times 7 is 21. So that's x to the 21. So z to the 4 raised to the exponent 1. So exponent to an exponent, so z to the 4 times 1 is 4, so that stays as is, z to the 4. Okay, so then we have 5 raised to the exponent 7. So that's a bit interesting. So looks like 5 doesn't have an exponent, but it does, right? So every base has an exponent. So here there's no exponent, but by default it's 1. So it's 5 to the 1 times 7 is 7. So the answer is 5 to the 7. Okay. Now let's look at 4a squared and then the whole thing squared. So here, remember the exponent of 2, which is on the outside of the bracket, it applies to each and every base that is inside the bracket. So inside the bracket we have two bases, the 4 and the a. What's the exponent on base 4? It's 1, right? So now this is going to be 4 to the 1 times 2, right? So 1 gets multiplied with that 2. That's the exponent on base 4. And then a, you multiply this exponent with the 2. So this is 2 times 2. So the final answer is 4 squared a to the 4, which is 16 a to the 4. So that's the final answer. 4 squared 16, a to the 4. Okay. Alright, so now let's look at, actually I'm going to start from the top so we have more room. So we have 5x to the 4 raised to the exponent 3. So again, the exponent of 3 applies to each and every base that's inside the bracket. 5 has an exponent of 1. So 1 times 3 is 3. And then x to the 4 times 3 is 12. Okay? And now you could leave the answer here, but 5 cubed, remember we said in the earlier tutorials that you're kind of expected to know what 5 to the 3 is, or should be, right? So 125 x to the 12. So the lesson here is that, yes, rule number 3 says the exponents get multiplied, but what you have to recognize is that 5 is also a base. So this is what most people miss. They apply the outer exponent of 3 only to the base x, right? So most people will hear, while they're learning, they will write final answer as 5x to the 12. So they will miss that they need to multiply 1 with the 3. Okay, so that's something you got to remember. Alright, so we have 3x a to the 7 raised to the exponent 2. So again here, people will forget the 3. People will multiply the exponent of 2 with the exponent on base x and the exponent on base a. So people usually sort of think that the variables are bases and not the numbers or the coefficients that are being multiplied in front. They're also bases. So just to be very clear, we can write 3 has an exponent of 1, x has an exponent of 1. So write that until you become comfortable where you no longer need to write the exponent of 1. So since we're learning, I'm going to write it so that you grasp the concept. So 1 times 2 is 2. And again, what's the exponent on x? 1 times 2. And what will be the exponent on base a? 7 times 2 is 14. So this equals, we can simplify 3 squared, so that's 9, and copy the rest as is, x to the 2, a to the 14. So that's the final answer for this one. Okay, so now let's look at, let's look at 2x to the 5, a to the 3 raised to the exponent 4. So again, 2 has an exponent of 1. So let's do each base. So 1 times 4 is 4, x, so 5 times 4 is 20, a, 3 times 4 is 12. And you are expected to figure out 2 to the 4. You're actually expected to know it's 16, x to the 20, then a to the 12. Okay? So now let's look at 10x to the 5, 10 to the 5. Okay, so 10 to the 5, x to the 2, y to the 1 raised to the exponent 3. So y, I'll write an exponent of 1. So 10 to the 5 times 3, 15. X to the 2 times 3 is 6. Y to the 1 times 3 is 3. So that's the answer. You're not expected to simplify 10 to the 15. Okay, so now another example, negative 2 x to the 4 raised to the exponent 3. Okay, so in this case we have negative inside the bracket. So does the exponent of 3 apply to negative as well? Yes, it does. Remember, we had said when we have negative 1 inside the bracket, you raise it to an even exponent, the answer is always positive. And when you have negative 1 raised to an odd exponent, the answer is always negative, right? So we actually have a negative 1 that is on the outside. So what is negative raised to an odd exponent, right? Raised to exponent of 3, it's going to be negative. So what I can do is, so I can say, okay, so this is actually negative 1 raised to the exponent 1. Then I have 2, and then I have x to the 4. So I've given you an intermediary step in between, just so that you can be very clear. Okay? So this step actually may cause confusion, so you don't really need this step, but just to get my point across, I'm going to show you, right? So, okay. So the negative, right? I just put a factor of 1 right after the negative sign because that's what it is. So now this really becomes negative 1 to the exponent 3, and then we have 2, 1 times 3 is 3, and then x to the 4 times 3 is 12. So that's what that becomes. And this equals negative 1 to the odd exponent is negative, 2 to the 3 is 8, and x to the 12. So that's the answer there. So you don't really need this step. You can go directly from here to sort of this step, and you can replace this by negative. So rewrite. So rewrite this. So negative, or redo the question. Negative 2x to the 4 raised to the 3. So this is how I would write it. I would say negative, overall it's going to be negative, so let me put negative. And then 2 has an exponent of 1, so 1 times 3 is 3. And then x to the 4 times 3 is 12. And then negative stays, 2 to the 3 is 8, x to the 12. So this is what we expect you to do, and this step is somewhat confusing here, right? Because the -1, it should really be in the brackets, and which is what I did over here, right? So this is just so that you know what's happening behind the scenes, right? But you can go directly from here to there to there. Okay. Okay, so now next example, -3a squared raised to the exponent 4. So again, we have a negative, right? So remember in the previous example I said -1, right? So, and that's fine. You can actually associate the negative with the 3 as well, because -1 times 3 is going to be -3. So negative raised to an even exponent is going to give you a positive answer. So just clear that and get it out of the way. Now this is going to be 3 to the 4. 1 times 4 is 4. And then a to the 2 times 4 is 8. And 3 to the 4, so 3 times 3 is 9. Then another 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81. So that's how you know 3 to the 4 is 81. 81 a to the 8. So how else could I have done this, just so that I grasp this concept of when there is a negative inside the bracket? So I could have said, okay, this question I can write -3, right? -3 inside the bracket, and then I could go a squared, right? And then I could just, to make myself clear, I could say put a 4 on the outside. So there really is no difference between this expression and this expression. They are identical. They are the same, right? So I've just combined the negative with the 3, just so that we can grasp what's really happening, right? So we're multiplying -3 and a squared, and that's exactly what we were doing here. So now it's clear for me that I can put an exponent of 1 on the outside of -3, right? So now I can apply rule number 3. So this will become -3 raised to the exponent. 1 times 4 is 4, right? So you multiply those. 1 times 4 is 4, and then a to the, you multiply the 2 and 4. So 2 times 4 is 8. And now it's very clear. So -3 raised to the exponent 4, that it's going to be positive. Positive 81 a to the 8. Okay, so I've done this question slightly differently this time, so you get to see the variation, that how it can be done. And again, you don't need the intermediary steps. You can just recognize negative raised to the even exponent will give me positive. This will become 3 to the 4, a to the 8, 81 a to the 8, and you're done. Okay, so now let's look at, okay, so that was -3a squared. Okay, so now let's look at -5xa raised to the exponent 2. So here, again, everything has an exponent of 1, 1, 1. So I'm going to do this really quickly. What's -5 squared? It'll be positive 25. X, 1 times 2 is 2. A, 1 times 2 is 2. So 25 x to the 2, a to the 2. So 25x squared, a squared. That's the answer, right? Once again, negative raised to an even exponent will give us positive answer. So you can put the negative on the 5 and say -5 squared gives me positive 25. And the rest is the variable. That part is simple. Okay, so now here I have negative on the outside, -4x to the 5y raised to the exponent 3. So what does this become? Now, in this case, what's important to know is that the exponent of 3 does not apply to this negative that's on the outside of the brackets. But the exponent of 3 does apply to the negative that's inside the bracket. Okay? So outside, it's just a factor of -1. So that is what and you can't multiply this negative times negative and say that's positive. Remember our rules of operations. We do brackets first, brackets, and then the exponents, and then comes the multiplication, which is this, right? -1 being multiplied with this bracket and exponent. So you can't multiply negative times negative, make it positive, because remember this negative is tied to this exponent, right? So you have to deal with the bracket and the exponent first before you can deal with this multiplication of -1. So order of operations, very important. Alright, so let's apply, so we'll copy this negative as is. Now negative raised to an odd exponent, the answer is going to be -4. 1 times 3 is 3, so 4 to the 3, x to the 5 times 3, multiply the exponents, 15, y to the 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so now let's figure this out. See, now I can multiply this negative with that negative, but even yet I'm still going to simplify the bracket first. So keep the negative. So -4, so this negative stays as is. You can look at it either way, right? So remember here we said negative to the 3 is going to be negative. So that negative stays. 4 to the 3, so 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times another 4 is 64. So 64, x to the 15, y to the 3. Okay, so now we can multiply this -1 with -64 and get positive 64. So 64, x to the 15, y to the 3. So that's the final answer. So again, order of operations, very important, right? So you can't say, well, if I multiply negative and negative, I'd get positive, and the answer is positive. Yes, the answer is positive, and you would have gotten lucky in this question, right? But the proper way is this, the way we've done it here. All right. So we'll do 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap the lesson. Okay, so positive 2a cubed. That looks simple. So we have 2 bases inside the bracket, the 2 and the a, and each has an exponent of 1. So exponent raised to an exponent, we apply rule number 3. So this will become 2 to the 3, a to the 3. And we are expected to simplify 2 to the 3, which is 8. So 8a to the 3. Alright, so next question, 3 over 4, x to the 3, the whole thing raised to the exponent 2. So in this case, so we have base x inside the bracket, and we also have base 3, and we have a base 4, right? So what this becomes is 3. Can you tell me what the exponent on this 2 on the 3 is going to be? I gave away the answer. So 1 times 2 is 2. And what about 4 in the denominator? So 4 also has an exponent of 1. So 1 times 2 is 2. So that's 4 to the exponent 2. And now deal with the variable. X to the 3 times 2 is 6. So this is a good example that in this case we have 3 bases. So yes, we have 3 over 4, which is a fraction, but still the 3 numerator, the 4 denominator are treated separately. They both have their own exponents. So now the rest is just arithmetic. 3 squared is 9, and x to the 6 goes on the top of the numerator all over 16. So that's the final answer there. And now we'll do very last question on rule number 3. So we have -2 over 3a raised to the exponent 3. Okay, so again, so it's just the negative that you have to pay extra attention to. So negative raised to an odd exponent. Overall the result is going to be negative, so I can just put a negative because I know the answer is going to be negative. And now the base 2 has an exponent of 1, so 1 times 3 is 3. All over, base 3 has an exponent of 1 here, so 1 times 3 is 3. And then a also has an exponent of 1, so 1 times 3 is 3. And now simplify this, so we have negative 8 in the numerator and 27 in the denominator, and then a to the 3, and a goes with the numerator. So that's the final answer. So I'm going to wrap up here. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, please like or subscribe, and thank you for watching, and we'll see each other in the next video. Once again, thank you for watching.